Hi, my name is Anne McElhenney.
And I'm Phelim McAleer, and welcome to the Anne and Phelim Scoop, where Anne McElhenney looks like she's not in America, where we normally broadcast the Anne and Phelim Scoop. Where are you, Anne?
I'm in Ireland wearing a large Gansey here to keep warm because this is what Ireland does best when it does the summer. You know, basically it's in the early 50s. So anyway, let's go on with the show. I will be sitting beside you next week, Phelim, in that studio.
Indeed.
So looking forward to being warm.
Yes. So big news today, Anne. Big news that on our show. We're going to have a big announcement. Tell us about it.
Yes, we've been hinting at this for a long time. We have a very timely podcast that we're going to talk to you about, a true crime podcast, which is very timely. I think you can probably almost guess when you hear me say that, but we're going to be bringing you more information about that in a second.
Yes, have we done a story about true crime recently in the past few years that's very timely? I think you'll be very interested to hear it as we go on. So the 75th Tony Awards were on last night. I watched them. It's the Tony Awards. They've always been. I think they were woke before the world was woke, but boy, they really took it home last night. So we look at who won and why they won, and it wasn't because of artistic merit. And of course, trans-Nazism, but I repeat myself, is making it increasingly difficult to make art. And we look at the latest artistic casualty of trans fascism, actually. So, California, Anne, tell us about crazy California.
You just can't make this stuff up. Basically in California, they think that black is white and that fish is not a fish if it's a bee or something like that. We'll bring you the latest madness from California. It's just beyond belief.
And Joe Biden has discovered one group of Americans who believe him when he tells them something. The oil producers across America believed him when he told them he wants to kill their industry, and we're all reaping the rewards of that, all reaping what Joe Biden has sown. So we'll be talking about that later on. So Anne, on with the show. Tell us about our podcast that's coming out, the new true crime podcast. What's it called and what's it about?
So our new podcast is called Serial Killer. And it's a true crime podcast about a serial killer that you all know very well because of the work we did, telling the story about Kermit Gosnell. Obviously, this is incredibly timely, but we're doing this as a podcast. A lot of you probably have heard of these true crime podcasts, Serial, Dirty John. There's loads of them out there, but we think that this story is Dr. Death. There's loads of these in the podcast universe.
Yeah, so it's called Serial Killer, a true crime podcast. And just to let people know, it's the story of America's most prolific serial killer, Kermit Gosnell. So, it was inspired by us. We did the book, we did the movie. And when we were and the book was a New York Times bestseller. So we know there's a lot of interest out there in this story. The movie was a huge hit. And when we were doing the research for that, we tape recorded a lot of the people, the prosecutors, the investigators, the detectives, his victims, even Gosnell himself from prison. We visited Gosnell in prison, so we realized these tapes are like a historical record that people need to know. And true crime,
it's a gold mine. Absolutely, it's a gold mine. And I think when we made the movie, these true crime podcasts weren't such a huge thing. Now we know that this is a massive universe of people who don't know this story, but who love the crime genre. We know, for example, that Serial, the NPR show, Serial was listened to by 450 million people. But before we go forward, even further with this film, let's let people hear a sample of what this is going to sound like.
This is a trailer. This is a trailer for Serial Killer, a true crime podcast, narrated and presented by Anne McElhenney.
My name is Anne McElhenney, and I'm an investigative journalist. I've never covered a story like the case of Philadelphia's Dr. Kermit Baron Gosnell.
I thought that I was among the most qualified and highest skilled providers.
And to realize what it was he was doing and how horrific it was.
It was a mill. It was a murder mill.
The night they came for me, no one told me.
I just took to Twitter. I would look at a reporter and I would ask them personally, why have you not covered the Kermit Gosnell story?
I mean, I think you did take a photograph at one stage, didn't you, Adrian?
Yes, I did. I took a photograph.
Was that the baby boy?
Yes.
It's the most upsetting case I ever worked on.
I never had a case that bothered me as much as this.
Please subscribe for free on your podcast app and sign up for our email list at serialkillerpod.com. So that gives you kind of an idea of what it sounds like. I mean, we have extraordinary interviews with people that have not been heard from before. We have, we have obviously extraordinarily exclusively, we have a lot of interviews with Kermit Gosnell himself in prison, in Huntington Prison. We talk to the prosecutors, we talk to the detectives. It's incredible, actually, and it's very, very powerful. It's in 6 episodes, and what we'd ask you to do right now is to subscribe.
Look, I mean, for those who don't know, Kermit Gosnell was the Philadelphia abortion doctor who killed women and he killed babies in his clinic for almost 40 years. The podcast exposes how Gosnell was able to kill for the 40 years. And how the crimes were eventually exposed. They were exposed almost by accident in a routine drugs investigations because he had a very lucrative sideline selling opioids. So we look at the opioid crisis. But one curious cop, Jim Wood, one guy who just didn't like what he was finding and followed a rabbit hole that took him to one of America's biggest serial killers. I mean, it was a forgotten victim. It was an immigrant, forgotten victim whose death had passed unremarked. And so it's got all those interviews. It also reveals how those who were supposed to stop Gosnell allowed him to keep killing. And the reason they allowed him to keep killing was for politics and race. And it's the politics of abortion. It's nothing can be done to put a negative spotlight on abortion. So women and children just paid the price year after year, decade after decade of this cover up. So we expose all that cover up. It's 6 episodes. It's a brilliant.
It's riveting. It's absolutely riveting. I mean, the interviews are extraordinary. I talked to all these extraordinary people. I spoke to victims. You hear those voices there. You hear the voices of the investigators, and obviously, very extraordinarily, you get to hear the voice of Gosnell, who I spoke to for, I don't know, hundreds of hours probably at the end. So, and you'll hear that distilled down into these 6 episodes. It's really compelling. So what you can do right now is if you just if you're watching this on YouTube, if you're listening to this on one of your apps, just go to the show notes. Go to the show notes right now and you will see where you can subscribe for free. And we would ask you to share that link, that subscription link. It's for free. Share it with everyone. The 6 episodes are not available right now. I think you probably can guess when we're going to drop those 6 episodes quite soon now, because this is very, very timely.
We should tell people we're going to drop it when the Dobbs decision is mentioned, when Roe versus Wade is probably finally overturned. But to get a notification, we will send it to you. If you go to serialkillerpod.com, that's serialkillerpod.com, and put your email address in there, we will send you the link the moment that it's available. And we've sent it to a few people just to hear what they think. The first episode is gripping. It's like how he was caught is like a movie in itself. He hadn't have been selling opioid prescriptions, he would still be killing with impunity. It's a very, very scary thought. So that's Serial Killer, a true crime podcast. Go to serialkillerpod.com. Register there, and you'll be the first to be. It's very important. Serial, which was the big true crime podcast, had a very liberal agenda to it about some guy who they claimed was wrongly convicted because he was a Muslim, etc. And even the true crime podcast, these episodic true crime podcasts, have been dominated with a kind of liberal slant. And true crime should be a truthful. It's called true. It shouldn't have a political agenda. And if anything, the agenda should be conservative. So we need to get Serial Killer, a true crime podcast, up at the top of the true crime podcast charts.
Yes.
And people need to see that the truth is compelling, the truth is interesting, and that there's an appetite for the truth. So please go to serialkillerpod.com and then send that link out to all your friends, all your lists, and let's get the story of Gosnell to people who normally wouldn't know about it, because the people who listen to true crime podcasts very often have limited interest in politics. But let's bring them some truth, some true crime, and some politics along the way.
Yeah, especially at this time. Well, it's interesting, when you talk about that, it really segues quite well into the next thing we're talking about, which is these Tony Awards, which have just happened. And, the three big winners, of the three big winners, two of them are like super, super woke. Of the three biggest winners. So the biggest winner is a musical called A Strange Loop. And it was named Broadway's best musical. Also, Company, a show called Company, and the Lehman Trilogy were the other two big winners. Obviously, the Lehman Trilogy, as we all know, was about Lehman Brothers, and that was a huge, huge winner. But A Strange Loop, I want to talk about A Strange Loop. But before I get to talk about Strange Loop, interesting point made by the Guardian, Phelim. And the minute I read this, I thought, this is so Phelim. You've made this point 100 times over. And the Guardian's Michael Billington made a really good point about those other two shows, the Lehman Trilogy and Company, which are British, originally British. And he says, this is the point he said, I've made this point, this confirms my thesis, this guy Billington says, that Broadway, the most rampantly commercial theatre on earth, depends heavily on the British taxpayer. And before anyone points out that Company originated on the West End, I'd observe whatever. But basically, he's saying that these shows have been heavily subsidized.
No, he says I would observe that its director, Marianne Elliott, and its designer, Bunny Christie, are both products of the subsidized sector. They came up through West End and the British system because...
and he goes on to say, and this is the point that you make all the time, Phelim. I just love this. He says, that the play was developed over 3 years, one of these plays, without any constraint of a schedule or even a plan. It was allowed time to find its form. And this is Guy Billington says, that reminds me of the gradual evolution of another national theatre hit, Warhorse. And it's the kind of luxury that's only enjoyed because of subsidized theatre. And the problem with subsidized theatre and the problem with having government involved in the arts is that you will end up with a situation like we have it in Ireland, by the way, we have it in the UK, where these, where these entities grow up, that they become like extraordinarily powerful, and they choose winners and losers, and you can imagine the kind of people who are making these decisions. So this is how the arts are getting promoted.
Well, I mean, it's also excuse me while I try and charge up my laptop here, because I think I'm going to die of exhaustion. My laptop is, but no, it also brings the point. The point is that there's this infrastructure that allows people to fail, that allows them to succeed, that allows them to, to try and try again until they produce really good art. And that infrastructure... Certain people. Yes. It's not there for the right. It's there for the left. And this is, then the left say, oh, conservatives don't produce good art. If you were subsidized for 30 years and allowed to fail for 20 of those years, you might come up with some great art.
Exactly. It's a kind of a money no object. It's a kind of a money no object situation. But I want to go back to A Strange Loop. So A Strange Loop was the big, massive winner this week at the Tony Awards, the 75th Tony Awards. It earned 11 nominations and it won 2, including Best Musical and Best Book of a Musical. It also won in 2020 the Pulitzer Prize. So this musical couldn't possibly be loved more. And, I've listened to some of the music. I actually downloaded the album today and listened to a little bit of the music. And a lot of it, by the way, I cannot quote on this show. Yes. I cannot quote at all. But the character in the play, the main character in the play, I mean, it's very artistic in terms of the structure. The main character is called Usher because he's an usher, and basically, here's the synopsis, by the way, and I think I took this from Wikipedia. You're going to love this. Usher is a black queer writer working a day job he hates while writing his original musical, which is a piece about a black queer writer working a day job he hates while writing his original musical. Michael R. Jackson's blistering, momentous musical follows a young artist at war with a host of demons, not least of which the punishing thoughts in his own head. And what they do is they have his thoughts in his head created, represented by a bunch of different actors. It's a very smart idea. And then they're shouting all these thoughts from his head. I mean, it's very, very artistic or whatever. But one of the things that just jumped out at me, and one of the first songs he sings, where you're hearing that he's the usher, he's sitting there, he's, wishing that he was the guy who was on stage or whatever. And he describes the people who come to talk to him and organize, people who are buying tickets or whatever. He talks of them, is a-hole, okay, I'll put it that way. A-hole tourists, he called them. And I thought, isn't that lovely? It's not just lovely. The people that keep Broadway going, and that's how he describes them.
Let me tell you this. I was recently in Broadway when we were over there for the Gosnell play. And now, by the way, the reason we did the Gosnell play was we recorded a lot of the reenactments from the trial and from the jury for the podcast, for Serial Killer, a true crime podcast. And we realized, this is in that play. So we put on the Gosnell play. It was very successful. But I took the opportunity to go to a lot of Broadway. And I'll tell you, these ushers in Broadway they're the a-holes, right? Especially now with all the masking. I remember saying that, there's this cliche or this joke about, people who read the Daily Mail people who run the Daily Telegraph used to run the country and think they still do. People who read the Daily Mail do run the country, and people who read the Guardian don't run the country, but I think they have the moral right to do so, and would, and let me tell you, if the artistic community ran the country, ran the world, they would be the a-holes, they would be the Nazis, they would be, and because, and by the way, funny enough, some of the nastiest ushers in Broadway were black queers, to quote Mr. Usher, the writer of this show. There was put on your mask, sit down, don't be mingling, put on your mask, show us your ID. And by the way, I thought showing ID was racist, but boy, you had to show your vaccine card and your ID ID to get into a Broadway show. But it's racist to ask someone to show their ID to go and vote. So yes, he did obviously he's pulling from personal experience when he makes the usher a nasty person. He might not think he's creating them as a nasty person. Funny, one thing, moving on to a different part of the Tonys last night, you'll remember Patti LuPone, the woman who from the stage attacked a member of the audience for not wearing a mask. Well, last night, Patti LuPone was on stage and was in the audience not wearing a mask. That was another thing. You go to a Broadway play now, you have to wear a mask. They went to the Broadway show and they were all sitting. Look at the pictures now, but I'll put those pictures up. They're all sitting like this, and none of them are wearing a mask. The rules are only for the little people.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. So what else? What's next, Dan? Oh yeah.
Before I leave this show, I just want to say a couple of other things that they've said. I mean, it's as I said, quite a lot of the content of the show I can't actually say, because I was really quite shocked at the words and the songs and that. I mean, really extraordinary. But, they say that it's a lot about thoughts interject, reminding him of his self-loathing, student loans, issues on black pride, and his repressed sexuality. He wishes he could act more like his inner white girl. There's a lot about the inner white girl. Usher's thoughts criticize Inner White Girl, the show, and advise him that the main character should have more sex appeal or whatever. And I love this bit, that the main character should have more sex appeal, or that he should add elements of slavery or police violence, so that the allies in the audience have something intersectional to hold on to. So he's I
wouldn't want to hold on to anything intersectional from him, let me tell you.
No, but it's amazing to me when you think of the people who go to New York to go to the shows, right? To go to the musicals. These are kind of, families from all over the States, regular folk, right? Yeah. Is this what people really want to see? And maybe that's not what the Tonys are about anyway. Maybe the Tonys were never about that. They don't care about what Joe Blow wants to watch when he gets up to New York. He wants to go to the Phantom of the Opera or whatever. No, but this is what they've decided is the best show available right now. So in another piece of craziness from California, this is just a recent ruling that has come down, which is just, you read stuff like this and you think, did I read this right? Is this the Babylon Bee? What's going on here? And so, I'm quoting here from, I think this is from the New York Times. In a ruling ripe for a Jay Leno monologue, a California court said last week that bees are legally fish.
Of course they are.
Bees are legally fish, and this is a law now. This is something that we're all meant to get behind and say, of course, bees are fish. And the consequences of this, by the way, it obviously sounds kind of funny, but the consequences of this are desperate for farmers because they add this huge layer of red tape to an already extraordinarily bureaucratic process for people trying to raise bees in California.
This is just fakeness. And this is why it's very important actually. The EPA, there's a Supreme Court case coming up about the EPA, and basically my understanding of the judgment is, can the EPA take decisions that will have massive impact on large numbers of people without Congress giving them the specific authority to do so? And this is why they shouldn't, because they've now decided a bee is a fish or a fish is a bee. But of course, in California, a man's a woman and a woman's a man. But this is also part of that madness where the law doesn't say what the left wants it to say. So they have decided, well, then we need to just ignore the law or twist the law. And I remember you saying, Anne, one of the reasons you want to leave California is because you'll never know. You just don't know what they'll do next. And believe me, we found
and they
out.
pretty much, and it's true, Phil, because they pretty much have done the unthinkable already. I mean, we know about these stories. For example, the stories all out there about, California now is going to become a sanctuary state for the trans people. And so you'll have people, moving from places like Texas or whatever, to transition children, really young children, because California will be a sanctuary state where they think that that's okay to medicate children who are as young as 5 and transition them.
It's already a sanctuary state for criminals. I mean, we saw during the Black Lives Matter riots, all those people who were arrested for attacking the police and damaging property, all their charges were dropped. And, this is, I'm watching, you probably have luckily been in Ireland, not seen the Capitol hearings. I mean, I watched some there on Monday. And I swear it was like a bad documentary made by a really bad activist. It's badly edited together, and you could see them editing out of context interviews from people trying to criminalize opinions. Very interesting. So it was like Trump was saying the election was stolen, and Bill Barr and some of his people were saying, I don't think that's correct, Mr. President. And then they were going, and what was the president's reaction? He ignored it and went out and gave the speech anyway. Look, everyone told Donald Trump he wasn't going to win in 2016. Everyone told Donald Trump that when he assassinated Soleimani in Iraq, Iran, that there was going to be riots and the Arab street was going to erupt and there was going to be 100. Nothing happened. So just because the consensus tells the president something doesn't mean he's obliged to follow it, and doesn't mean that's a crime. We've seen where experts have got us, and the experts are frequently wrong, often wrong. Inflation was going to be transitory. It wasn't, and now they're going to bring in a recession. It's amazing. They give you $600, a couple of $600 checks, which lasted a week or two, and then the reward for that is they're going to deliberately, remember this, the recession that's coming is not a freak of nature, is not an accident. It is a deliberate plan to counteract the measures that they took. That's so that's. Anyway, I got distracted, but the law is not the law is not protecting people now. The law is an instrument of power, and it's a very scary time. And we see that actually. That brings us on to the next topic.
Yes.
Biden is begging, according to the Financial Times, U.S. oil producers ignore Biden's rallying call to drill. Right, and it's like, so Biden is
God,
begging oil people to drill, right? And because oil prices are so high and petrol prices are so high. But so and it's the Financial Times, and of course they're going and they're ignoring it, and production has not ramped up like he thought it was, and they're all shocked in the White House. First of all, if you've spent any time with drillers, they love drilling, right? But it's see, the thing is, these people think it's just drilling a hole and pumping stuff up.
Oh
There's
yeah,
more.
yeah,
There's more
yeah.
computers
They
on
think
a
it's
drill
They
site.
think if you can. They think you can switch it on and switch it off.
Yeah.
Basically, yes.
There's more computers on a drill site, on a new drill site, than I would say there are in the whole of the White House. Like, it is an incredibly. There's these trucks that come, and they're not holding the workers. They're holding bank after bank of seismic charts, seismic computers, drilling computers. It's an incredibly technological process. It's very expensive. It's very labor intensive as well, and it's very skilled. And when you spend years attacking those industries, and when you spend 2 years shutting the world down, and those people aren't working, you just can't ramp them up again. But that's what the Financial Times says. But the reality, and they also criticize the oil industry for giving money back to investors and shareholders and not spending tens of billions of dollars on new production and new research. Look, you would be crazy if you had $10 billion, if you were an oil company and you had $10 billion, you would be crazy going to Pennsylvania or to New Mexico or to California and starting drilling again. Because as soon as the price drops, they will start prosecuting and persecuting you, and your money will be wasted. So far better off giving it out to your shareholders and dividends, giving it to the bank who lent you money, rather than spending it. Because but Biden made a pledge to destroy the oil industry during the campaign. One of the first things he did was close the Keystone Pipeline. If he really wanted an increase in production, he would have the Keystone Pipeline open, and Canadian oil would be flowing here. He didn't. He did the exact opposite. So why on earth would anyone invest their tens of billions in drilling when it's going to be wasted? So please give it back to the shareholders, give it back to the banks. And elections have consequences, folks.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
Well, I think Joe Biden is getting very, very worried about that. He's getting very, very worried about these numbers, about inflation, about all of this. That is, it's what was the line a few years ago? It's the economy, silly, right?
Yes, stupid.
It's the economy, stupid. Basically that's what people are really thinking about. But we're thinking a lot right now, right, Phelim, about the decision that's about to come down from the Supreme Court. I think a lot of you guys are with us on that. I mean, each day, obviously, we're watching and waiting to find out what, and it'll be soon. It could even be today, by the way. It could be today that it'll happen.
This podcast is coming out on Wednesday. It could be today.
So it could be today. It could be next Monday. We'll be watching. And again, what's really important, though, is we have this incredibly timely true crime podcast that speaks like volumes about everything that's wrong, actually, with this whole, everything that people don't talk enough about is what we have as well in that podcast. Things like comfort care, for example, by the way, which was a huge revelation to you and I, Phelim, when we came to this story, to this Gosnell story. And then we're like going through transcripts where you were in the courtroom hearing the doctor describe comfort care. And basically, I mean, I know I heard you say this many times, that you were looking at, people around the courtroom who were like basically checking each other and saying, did I just hear that correctly? Did I hear it correctly that a baby that is born, that is accidentally born alive in an abortion is then neglected to death, and that's legal, and that you just leave it there?
Standard medical practice. The doctor was asked, because Gosnell, babies were born alive, Gosnell was murdering them, and the doctor was asked, what happens if in a good abortion in a hospital setting, a baby is born alive? And she goes, it doesn't happen. But what happens if it does? Well, then we do comfort care. What's that? We keep it warm. Eventually it will pass. In other words, it will die of neglect. So we learned a lot.
And the other thing that I was thinking about recently as well, and again, please, we'll have all the information about how you can subscribe to this free subscription, by the way, to listen to the 6 episodes of the podcast when this decision drops from the Supreme Court. The other thing that I've been thinking a lot about lately, because I think the pro-abortion side are obviously trying to muddy the water. They're obviously trying to say things that aren't true. They're panicking people with things that are not true, and saying that things that the anti-abortion people are saying, they're saying, oh, you're talking about outliers. So second and third trimester abortions are outliers. Well, I went through the numbers, by the way, and I think it's also very interesting for people to know this. I think this is just a really interesting thing that I've only recently come to become aware of. When people talk about the number of abortions in the United States of America, it's a guesstimate. At the very, very best, it's a guesstimate because they are not required to tell. So they're not required to report. And worse than that, in the places where they are required to report, they very often don't. And how do we know that? Because we made the Gosnell movie, we've made this Gosnell podcast, we wrote the book, and we found out that Gosnell did not report on the abortions he did, and no one checked up on him, and no one got in touch with him.
Gosnell, in the podcast, actually, Gosnell talks about doing the procedure tens of thousands of times, right? I think he says 20 or 30,000 times, and we know that's probably true. He never once sent in paperwork to the Department of Health in Pennsylvania, as he was legally obliged to do. So there are plenty of other Gosnells not sending in paperwork as they're legally obliged to do. So we have no genuine record.
Well, why would you, we know, for example, in the case of Gosnell, that he didn't send in paperwork and there were no consequences. Nobody likes paperwork, by the way. People don't like doing that, right? So if you're running at one of these abortion clinics in Pennsylvania, we know, because we've done the work on this, that they're obviously, the people in Harrisburg and the Department of Health are not checking up because they weren't checking up on Gosnell. But the other, just one point I want to make, and I know we're coming to the end of the show, but one point I want to make that I think is really important for people. When people say to you, if, pro-abortion activists say to you that this talk of second and third trimester abortions, these are outliers, whatever. First of all, here's the thing that's important to say. The numbers that are available are a guesstimate, by the way. And obviously, because they're a guesstimate, I would think they're very, very much on the lower side. But basing this on the Guttmacher Institute, the crowd that are, the kind of the pro-abortion activist organization that, they're very much the respected voice for the pro-abortion movement, Guttmacher. And they basically say, and in the last year, I think the records are available, which I think is 2019, over nearly 700,000, 690,000 abortions happened in the United States. As I said, this could be on the low side. And then they actually break that down by gestational age.
Yeah.
And you dig into that. What we're talking about is tens of thousands of babies aborted in the second and third trimester. Yeah. Tens of thousands. Tens of thousands is not an outlier. There's nothing outlierish about. And another thing that I've noticed, and one of the things that some people in the media are talking a little bit about this, I saw something in the Wall Street Journal about it, but another very important point to bring up and to think about and to talk to people if you're having this conversation with people is, the pro-abortion people say that, there's a general consensus in the United States that everyone is in favor of abortion. General consensus. You need to really ask, what question was asked to elicit that response? And it becomes very interesting when you dig into this polling. The truth is that the vast majority of Americans do not agree with abortion in the second and third trimester. So we should start from that basis, and people should understand that there is actually a very, very sizable proportion of the American public who are not happy with the situation as it is right now, which is abortion up to 9 months in many, many, many places in America.
Many places. So, and people don't know that. But just why we're talking about this is this podcast is coming up, and it's a true crime podcast. So we look at the Gosnell story as a crime story, and podcasts are very popular with young people. True crime is particularly popular. So it's a great way of getting this story out to young people. So we're going to end the show with playing the trailer again. But I just want to remind people to get more information and to be the first to get the episodes. Go to serialkillerpod.com now. Put your email address in, and it'll arrive in your inbox the moment the Roe versus Wade decision comes down. So let's end the show today with the trailer, and we'll be back in America next week. Scaredy Cat and Top Cat have missed you, Anne.
Thank you.
Yeah, Top Cat has been.
I hope my husband has also missed me.
Yes, of course. That goes without saying. But I can vocalize it. But Scaredy and Top are not very fond of vocalizing. But Top has been whining like a like a little girl since you've left.
Oh,
Oh, and by the
Mr.
way,
Top
somebody,
Cat.
we have a Russian friend, and she was in the
We
other
do.
day, and she called the other cat Scarcity Cat.
Scarcity cat. Oh, that's a good one, actually. Given the times we're living in.
The times we were living in, I thought very Russian. There is a famine coming, across the steppes.
Yes.
And
Yes.
we have to
Well,
scare.
gosh, I certainly hope not. I certainly hope not. I think people are. I saw a headline there where somebody said that sriracha. I think I might have sent that to you, Phelim. That there's a kind of that people are worried that sriracha production is going to be affected by these supply chain difficulties. And I said, don't come for the hot sauce, please. Whatever you do, don't come for the hot sauce.
That's saying what's the difference between a recession and a depression? A recession is when your neighbor loses his job. A depression is when you lose your job. So
Yes.
supply chain shortages are when people can't find baby formula, but when you can't find your hot sauce, that is a full blown.
That's the crisis. That's the crisis.
Let's end with
before we end. Actually, I should say to people, like, really, just a little snippet from Ireland, just a snippet of information. I'll tell more when I get there next week, but. Very interesting. Like, the big story in Ireland right now, one of the big stories in Ireland right now, is that tourism is being really badly affected by the oil price, and by supply chain difficulties, and particularly supply chain difficulties when it comes to car rental. So people who a lot of times tourists will come to Ireland, they'll rent a home, or they'll go to, they'll travel around Ireland, and Ireland doesn't have a transport system, doesn't have an infrastructure that makes it easy for tourists to see the country. So people like to rent a car. But basically, the cost of renting a car now in Ireland, and everyone has a story, and everyone, one story is worse than another. But basically, you would buy a car for the price of renting a car. Right. So I actually am using public transport, or abusing public transport, or not using it really properly. But basically, it's kind of an interesting. I'm basically depending on friends, on the kindness of friends. But this is an extraordinary situation that is dramatically affecting Irish tourism, where people cannot afford to rent a car because of I suppose because of COVID, Phelim, really, right?
Socialist Irish writer Sally Rooney, so loved by the Obama. She could have a new book. Her original book was Conversation with Friends. Could have a new book called Transportation with Friends.
Okay, on that note, Phelim, I think we should stop. Cha-ching. Thank you so much. We'll be in the same jurisdiction next week.
Yes, but we're going to end the show with playing the Gosnell trailer, the Gosnell teaser.
Yes.
So that people can get one more sense of it and know where to go to get the first episode sent to them when it's released. That's serialkillerpod.com. Let's end with the Gosnell trailer now.
The promo. Thank you. My name is Anne McElhinney, and I'm an investigative journalist. I've never covered a story like the case of Philadelphia's Dr. Kermit Gosnell.
I thought that I was among the most qualified and highest skilled providers.
And to realize what it was he was doing and how horrific it was.
It was a mill. It was a murder mill.
The night they came for me, no one told me.
I just took to Twitter. I would look at a reporter and I would ask them personally, why have you not covered the Kermit Gosnell story?
I mean, I think you did take a photograph at one stage, didn't you, Adrian?
Yes, I did. I took a photograph.
Was that the baby boy?
Yes.
It's the most upsetting case I ever worked on. I never had a case that bothered me as much as this.
Please subscribe for free on your podcast app and sign up for our email list at serialkillerpod.com.